Hello, everybody. Just getting myself set up here. Just gonna give it a couple minutes after to wait for attendees to level off, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I did go ahead and enable chat for everybody. Just note that you can send messages to anybody in here. So if you need to send something directly to me, just make sure that box is specifically checked. Just give it just a couple more minutes to see, or just get people in here. All right, looks like the attendees have leveled off, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello everybody. My name is Andre Little. I'm an AI consultant here at Team Dynamics. Welcome to the last day of your bot training. So today we're going to be specifically going over bot tuning. We'll have some time for some questions and answers based off of that. And then from there, what we're going to do is go into some Q&A time. So what I mean by that Q&A time is oh gosh, how do I phrase this? Is I'll allow you guys to be able to unmute. You'll be able to raise your hand during that time period and then just kind of ask questions either about the stuff we go over today, the stuff you've gone over during the week, or anything that you, or any other questions that you have specifically around the bot and building your bot. Let's go ahead and get started. So the agenda for today, so we're going to go over some housekeeping. What is bot intent tuning and what does that look like? Some next steps, break, and then that Q&A time that I was just talking about. So the housekeeping stuff, it's basically the same thing you guys have heard throughout the entire week. So I'll kind of jump through it a little bit fast and then slow down as we get going along faster, or as we get moving along into the actual work. So help and support. So remember that there is coursework. Not all the tasks have to be finished by the end of this course. This is a skill building course, and the action items are there just to help you grasp the concept of how to do these configurations. Not everything has to be fully configured before checking it off. Just keep that in mind. If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to schedule time with us. If you have questions or would like a consultant to go through some of the tasks with you, I get the pleasure of being able to work with you guys all the time prior to you all working one-on-one with a consultant, and I always find those sessions incredibly valuable. So please don't ever hesitate to schedule those sessions because there's not a limit to how many you can schedule. And we do recommend scheduling that time with us if you run into any issues or things that you may not understand. So the session logistics today. So once again, all attendees are muted. Now, like I said, whenever it comes to the Q&A portion at the end, excuse me, after the break, then we'll allow you to be able to unmute. All the recordings are transcribed and the transcription is searchable. If you don't see the transcript, it just means it hasn't finished processing yet. Today, we should see this session last right at about an hour with some time saved at the end for the Q&A. The session recordings will be available for 12 months post-session, so ensure that you do download your recordings. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Once again, use that Q&A to ask questions. This is so that everybody can see these things. And then use the chat. And then, like I said, I set the chat to be so you can chat amongst everybody. However, if you need something for like a password reset or some sort of account issue, make sure you check for that panelist only. So the session outcomes today. So after today's session, this is what you'll be expected to know. How to maintain your bot over time, and then what are those best practices for debugging and improving your bot post-launch? So let's go and do a call to action. Let's go and get you to sign into your iPass or CAI environment, and then go ahead and drop in the chat letting me know that you are signed in. Alrighty, Laura was on top of it today. All right, seeing people get signed in, navigating to their bots. We'll just give it a few minutes. Having a login issue today. Stand by. Password reset in progress. Awesome. We'll give a little bit more time than usual. Awesome. I see people are still getting signed in. This is probably the highest level of engagement that I've seen thus far from people signing in. So this is awesome. So, William, I'll give you about another 20 or 30 seconds to get yourself situated, and then we'll get going. So the passwords for the TD app and solutions at Team Dynamics are not related. You did reset the ladder yesterday to access the recordings in our project. So yeah, so the TD app password is entirely different than your than the solutions password. So you could go to that us1.teamdynamics.com/TD app, and then there's that forgot password option on there if you did forget it. Give you about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, awesome. All right, so bot tuning. So for bot tuning, we always like to start off this quote or this training with this quote. It says, if you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you've launched too late. This is by Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn. So why do we like sharing this quote at the very beginning of this specific training and even at the end of this course week? So one of the things about a chatbot is that whenever we're getting ready to prepare for it, the planning of it, and working with your consultant, we're really going to heavily work towards what we refer to as a minimum viable product. So what we really want to focus on are just the heavy hitter intents, like the password reset intents, probably you're connecting to Wi-Fi, things like that. We don't want to build a fully fledged bot from the beginning. Now, why is this the case? It is because whenever we try to assume everything that users are going to ask into your bot, you're going to probably end up building what we refer to as redundant things, or things that are not even going to be used or used incredibly infrequently, that don't provide a value to the larger size of the organization. Whenever we are actually using, or whenever we actually go live with the bot, that's going to be our most valuable portion of our implementation, because what that's going to do is it's going to show us how our users are truly wanting to interact with our bot, and how we can start making our own personal roadmap and improvements associated with it. So essentially, all we're trying to say here is that it may seem like we're not going live with a lot initially. However, this is one of those types of projects and products and processes that you need that iteration and that feedback from your users. In other words, just having people use it to really truly see what is the main content that we specifically need to be adding. So, user feedback. So, how do we start evaluating our user feedback? So, once your bot is live and engaging with users, once again, you're going to get that best testing data and your greatest sources of improvement. This is going to be the most valuable part of the process, as it helps us to refine and enhance that bot's capabilities, ensuring it becomes more effective over time. So like I said, this is an iterative process. We're not going to get everything perfect whenever we first go live, but we want to start off with the things that we know that are going to be useful, and then slowly add on to that based on how users are actually asking questions. So why? Just kind of alluded to all of these things. So why do we want to kind of go live with that minimum viable product? Because once again, this bot is going to be continuous improvement. It's kind of like a knowledge base. Things are always going to be updating. You always are going to be making changes based on how your users are interacting with certain areas. You also want to avoid perfectionism. So, like I said earlier, we're not going to get these things perfect at the very beginning. If we strive for perfection, that might end up causing us to create things that are never going to be used, or things that might not provide that big value to that or to the organization. But also the biggest thing is that it's going to lead us to market testing. So we're getting that user feedback, we're seeing how users are interacting with it, and then being able to make our changes and adjustments from there. And throughout this training, I'll give you guys some examples of just my own personal experiences of working with this to show you how we make these improvements. So, what are the different like two types of ways that we watch to make for improvements? So we have two main categories for these things. We have misinterpreted utterances and then unplanned utterances. So we're going to go in depth on each one of these things to talk about how do we identify what is the difference between the misinterpreted and the unplanned? What is our process for evaluating those things? And then how do we actually go about making the changes accordingly? So misinterpretation. This happens when a user correctly asks for an intent that we have created, but the bot got it wrong. Now, there can be a couple of different reasons. It could be the context of how the user asked the question. It could be maybe some of the backend settings that we had set up were not configured to allow for, depending on how the user asked their question, to actually match to the proper intent, and a couple other small things. The other item that we have is that unplanned utterances. These are the intents that we haven't built yet that users are asking for. This is what can either reveal one of two things. It can reveal the new ideas for possibly new intents, and then also these things could turn out to be irrelevant. I will say this, and this is just coming from experience of having launch bots. Before I worked at Team Dynamics, I worked at a university, and I actually launched that university's first chatbot there. And just like me and just like you guys, you will be shocked to know what people are asking into your bot. People will say some really funny and just very wild things into it. And we really have to come up with a good strategy on how do we evaluate those things. So evaluating misinterpreted utterances. So we should judge misinterpreted utterances by semantic diversity and our quality. So the big questions, and these are kind of like the rhetorical questions we ask ourselves when evaluating these utterances. Is this utterance different enough from my current utterances to make sense, or essentially your intent descriptions? Is this user's message low quality, and should I add it or modify that intent description accordingly based on how the user asked their question? So as we're evaluating these things, this is kind of the evaluation that I tend to go through and that a lot of other people tend to go through when trying to make these improvements. So the biggest thing is how closely does this resemble the trained example? So whenever we look at the intent descriptions for stuff, how closely is that actually related to what the user's question was asking? Maybe our description was potentially too specific and maybe we want to reword it a little bit to loosen it up. Or the alternative thing is that it potentially we had too many things that were not super specific that then led to those misinterpretations. So essentially, we're assessing that similarity between the misinterpreted utterances and those trained items to see if there's any significant deviation. This is going to be that area. This is going to be where we need to evaluate or potentially diversify some of that training data. The next area that we want to specifically look at is, was the utterance ambiguous or vague? So was the question that the user asked into our bot ambiguous or vague? Essentially, was there a lack of detail in that utterance? And then an addition one is, do you as an individual user, do I have trouble understanding what they're asking for? Essentially, if they just came in and said something and you are like, well, they could mean this, this, or this, that's an example of something that's ambiguous and vague. And we'll go through some examples of like the two different ways on how we can evaluate those things. Now, before I move on, are there any questions? And if there's at any point that I'm ever going too fast, I'm always looking at the chat and the Q&A, so don't hesitate to say slow down. But any questions this far? Hey, not seeing anything come in, so we'll go ahead and move on. So here's an example of, and this is a very staged example. I want to make that very, very clear for this. But so here we can see the description of handles things like I tried resetting my password, solving issues, I need to reset my password. This is what our intent description looks like. Now, whenever somebody came in and said, I'm looking to get my PW reset, how can I do that? It says, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Please try asking your question a different way. So whenever we look back, and I'll kind of just flash this slide here for you all, we want to look at how closely does this utterance resemble my already existing intent description and the language within it, and then was it ambiguous or vague? So let's go ahead and look at this little checklist. So I'm looking to get my PW reset. How can I do that? So whenever we're looking at our language in our description, we're looking at past, it's nothing is necessarily specifically saying PW. Now, I want to make this very clear again. This is a very highly staged example, but it's still a proof of concept for it. Within this, they're saying, I'm looking to get my PW reset. How can I do that? We're looking at our intent description. We might want to diversify it a little bit by including acronyms like PW in there. Now, because we are using an LLM engine and an AI engine to actually match our intents, it actually is really good at handling for those more ambiguous things like acronyms. So like PW for password, MS for Microsoft, things like that. It's actually really good at doing stuff like that. So we don't need to do it as much as we would think, but we might still see cases where it misses things because of it. So the biggest thing that we can look at for this is that it does resemble our training data, but not fully. In addition to that, too, that secondary question is this ambiguous or vague? So we can clearly see that this person is looking for a password reset. They just used an acronym for it, but we can see that that question is very specific in what they're wanting. So this right here is a really good example about an utterance that we would want to evaluate and then retrain our bot on to specifically handle for the future. Now, are there any questions on this example? We'll go over another example of like what a bad example looks like too. How would you alter the intent description to account for PW? So that's something that we'll get into here, like at the end of like how do we actually modify those things and like the automatic process for modifying those things. And then there's also other like things that we can do as well. And I'll kind of give you guys some more like advanced tips and tricks today as well associated with that stuff. So, but like just know that that's something that we'll get into like closer to the end of this section of the training. So, all right. So no other questions, and I'm going to keep your question up in the Q&A just so then whenever it comes time, I'll make sure to point it out to you. So let's look at a bad example. So here's a bad utterance example of something that we wouldn't want to evaluate. All the person said is can't get in. Now, in this type of a situation, this is where we once again want to ask ourselves things. Can't get in. Okay, well, how closely does this relate to already existing utterances that we have? Well, we can tell that like for like that password reset example, like there's nothing about just not being able to get in. But the secondary question we're asking ourselves is this utterance, is what the user said ambiguous or vague? Excuse me. In this case, can't get in. Well, I could start making some assumptions of they can't get into their account, they can't get into their email, they can't get into the Wi-Fi, they can't get into a building, they can't get into their own house. That's just an example of what ambiguous utterance might look like. Is if I have to start assuming what the user is actually asking for and wanting, I have to try to start assuming what their intent is. Then this is no point for me to try to start evaluating this thing. Now, whenever we're looking at these utterances, we're not going to be making modifications to our bot based off of every single one because we really want to be strategic about it. If we were to make modifications with something like this, it could actually end up throwing our bot off more and more. So we really want to be strategic whenever it comes to those things as we start to make future improvements on it. So this is that example of we don't want to do anything or any part of an evaluation associated with this. Are there any questions on that and how we kind of evaluated those two things differently? And to kind of sum it up for you all too is that if you have to try to assume what the person is asking for, then this is not a case that we actually want to continue to evaluate. Because the second we start assuming, then we're trying to assume what a person is wanting, and then there'll probably be the cases where we get it wrong, and then that can end up messing up your bot in the future and leading to more misinterpreted utterances. But any questions based off of this? Not seeing anything come through. So we will go ahead and move on. So now let's look at the unplanned utterances and how do we actually evaluate these things. So unplanned utterances, once again, these are the ones that were not originally planned for in the building phase. So, and like just that initial bot design, these will commonly route to the no match section of our, or no match intent section within that choreographer intent where it says, I'm sorry, I don't know. Please try asking your question a different way. Well, this person said, make me a sandwich. Now, I'm just going to kind of build the picture for you that they asked this into an IT chatbot without small talk turned on. So the question of make or that statement of make me a sandwich, this is going to be one of those cases where we don't really want to potentially add this unless maybe you are building this for a deli, then maybe we do want this, um but in that case of an IT chatbot, this is going to be one of those examples where it was unplanned and maybe we don't even want to evaluate this. But what are our considerations for evaluating our unplanned utterances? Well, here we go. So, whenever we're judging our unplanned utterances, we want to judge them by their potential and their quality of stuff. So, the first question that we're going to be asking ourselves is this user's message low quality and should be ignored? And then that second thing is, did this user request something I've built before or I've never built before? And are they also requesting something that I've seen before as well, based on what other people are asking? To kind of dive down more deeper into these things, these are kind of the full rhetorical questions that we want to ask ourselves is what is the nature of the unplanned intent? So essentially, we want to determine whether this unplanned utterance represents a new, and then the kind of keyword in this is valuable intent, not previously considered during that initial building phase. So one of the things that we really have to focus on is the value proposition of of the question that the person asked. Now, within this value, we have to usually the rule of thumb that I always recommend to people is if it will benefit 60% or more of your organization, then honestly, it's a great option to add to the list of things. If it doesn't, like especially at the very beginning of your initial bot launch. Now, as you are live for longer and you start to build more and more into it, you might be able to add or you might be able to add some things that provide value to smaller portions of your organization, but you really at the beginning want to focus on the big ones. The next thing we want to look at is the frequency of this intent or what they were asking. So, do lots of users ask for this thing? Because what this really will identify is how are we, or how does it relate to the similar ones? And then and then the high frequency of this question. One, it lets you know that there's gaps within the bot knowledge. There's probably gaps within your already existing knowledge, within your knowledge base and processes, but it's going to lead to that gap in the bot training. Now, I do see, and William, if you can also toss this into the Q&A just so everyone can see it, but I'll read it back as well. So William in the chat, he asked it, but he only sent it to the host, just to me. He asked, "Is there a way we can get reports from what people are trying to enter into the bot to refine and define new intents. So, William, yes, there is, and we'll make sure that we do show that during this training. We're just going over the concepts and stuff right now. We'll make a good transition to actually showing those things off. So, um, but now to kind of jump back on track. So whenever we're evaluating these unplanned utterances, we want to ask ourselves those questions. The biggest key word to this is we don't want to go into analysis paralysis when we have these. Now, the biggest reason as to why is because a lot of times what I tend to see within bots and user interactions with it is you will have the people that ask the majority, like the same questions over and over again because they can't find the information on it, and then the bot's going to be the easiest way. However, in some situations, you are going to have a lot of one-off questions. So these one-off questions are very set niche and specific use cases. That's why we want to add that frequency portion into there because if there's not a lot of people asking for that one specific thing, then there might not be the value to add it. I'll give you an example of a case where we evaluated something that was unplanned and added it. This is me working with a customer. So I was working with a university and we built their bot. And within the initial design, we never built what we would like a phishing intent. So something to help users like with a phishing process. Well, this university, and it was something that was also never thought of to build. Well, this university did suffer from a very bad phishing attack within their organization. And when we looked at the bot logs, they heavily pushed people to use their portal. But when we looked at the bot logs, we saw probably about I would want to say like 30 different people or 30 different chats ask the question or say a statement of I got a suspicious email. What do I do? Is this email real? Was this email sent from the university and things like that? So when we look at this thing, so what was the nature of the unplanned intent? So we're looking at the value proposition of it and was it previously considered? So for us, it was not previously considered, but the value proposition for something like this, especially in that moment, was incredibly high. But also, if something like this happens in the future, they have a process for evaluating that. So that was a good checkbox for that first question. The second one is, do a lot of users ask for this? Well, we saw a high level of frequency due to circumstances, but there was a high level of frequency in a short period of time, which did show us that there was a significant gap within our bot's training data. So this is a clear example of something that we wanted to evaluate and actually add to our bot based on what the previous users were asking for. And we were actually able to build our intent description purely based off of what those users were asking with some of the concrete examples of what they were actually asking. So that's a really good example of one of those things where it matches the nature of it because it was valuable and it wasn't previously considered. And there was a high level of frequency, which showed us that this is something we need to specifically get in there. So, are there any questions on, or does anybody have any examples of saying like, oh, like how would you evaluate under XYZ scenario? Not seeing anything come in. I'll give like another 30 seconds if you're typing something out though. Not seeing anything come in, so we'll go ahead and continue on. So the main questions that were asked earlier about how do we get the reports and how do we actually do this stuff for you, this is where we're going to jump into that. So how do we actually tune our bot? So what is bot tuning? So this is that fine-tuning process of evaluating those misinterpreted and unplanned utterances with the bot to make it smarter over time and more accurately answer users' questions. Now, how do we actually tune our bot? So in your bot application on the left navigation menu, navigate to the operations in that operations section. I think it's like third from the bottom, and that's a little drop down. Whenever you click into that, whenever you click that drop down, then there's going to be another section called utterance analysis. Here, this is where we're going to be able to see all the utterances that come through above a specific confidence level, where we can then make changes by either refining existing intents or creating new ones. So that little star lets me know that it is time to show this off. So let me find my browser window and cursor. There we go. All right, so this is the bot that we have been working, or that was built on the first day. So I was kind of just doing some training in here, or just some playing around with it earlier. Um, Now I am on a big monitor, and I'm still kind of getting used to like where do I zoom in for these trainings. Is this a good zoom in view for everybody here? Just kind of if I get like one or two people that give me a yes in the chat, that'll be awesome. All right, perfect. If anybody needs me to zoom in more, please don't hesitate to just say that and I can zoom in a touch more. So like I said, on that left nav menu, so we scroll down, we see this operations section. And then we have this conversation history, which just shows you like all the conversations where you can where you can view the full transcripts. But we want to go to this utterance analysis section. So whenever I click into here, we can see all of the questions that are being asked into your bot. Now you have a couple of different ways to like kind of filter through these and use these things. You can either look at all utterances, so all the questions that have been asked into your bot. You can look at intent usage, knowledge usage, and small talk usage, so you can see what questions people are asking down to those specific sections. However, one of the really key areas that you want to look at for unplanned things is this results dropdown. You also have this not handled section. So whenever you click on that, it's going to show you all the things that are not handled within your bot. Now, whenever it comes to evaluating misinterpreted stuff, that just comes down to having the diligence to go through and just say, okay, was this matching to the right intent, or could it have potentially matched to a different one? So that's just where we want to go through and actually evaluate those things. Now, whenever I start looking at these things, we can see that, and this is what's really cool about the agentic intent matching. So whenever you actually click on one of these things, it'll open up or one of the utterances. It'll open up a dialog and actually show you the matched intent, the top match confidence, which in this case was that password reset, and then the match reasoning. So this user is described. So the question that was asked is, I'm getting an error where it says my password is incorrect, but I cannot figure out why that is the case. It matched at a 98% confidence to this user is describing an issue regarding their password being marked incorrect and not understanding the reason why, which matches both password reset problems and general password issues addressed in that password reset skill. So in this case, this one matched actually incredibly high. Now we have some other things in here like what is your favorite color, how do I connect to Wi-Fi, and some other things into there. Now within this intent, the way that, like I said, people can ask, or within your bot, the way that people ask things could lead to potentially missed or new ones. So I came into the bot earlier and said, how do I connect to Wi-Fi? Now we can see that this was not handled. Now the process for doing these things will actually be the same for, or they'll vary a little bit differently for creating new ones and then for creating new intents versus just resolving ones. But if I wanted to go ahead and create a new one for this, like this, how do I connect to Wi-Fi? You have this little circle exclamation check icon. If you just click on that, then it opens you up this dialog. So this is where we select a matching intent and then be able to, and then once again, it says to create a new intent instead of, to create a new intent instead, cancel the wizard and then use the add new intent option. But this is where we can get a view of what are the actual, I'm just going to zoom out just a touch, where we can see what's actually already out there. But if we want to create that new one, we just click the little drop down right there, and then we can click on add new intent. So whenever I click on this, then I can give it the intent name, and then it'll automatically give me an intent description, and then that's where I can go in there and click on add new. Now, for the resolution of utterances or refining of utterances, let's say for this one, I'm getting error where it's saying my password is incorrect. Let's say that this was handled by maybe a different intent or something like that. What I can do is I can come in here and I can click on that resolve intent, and then you select the intent that you wanted to actually go to. Like I said, now for this kind of a case, this one actually matched positively, but if we were matched, let's pretend that it matched to something different or it didn't match at all, then we select the intent that we want to. Now you'll notice that it does have those match confidences off to the side. Let me zoom out here a little bit more just so we can see it. We can see that it does have those elements there. We'll just pretend that this matched at a lower time or at a lower confidence, but we would select the intent we want it to match to, click on next, and then what it's going to do is this is what our current information looks like. So this was our utterance. The name of it is password reset, and then this is the description of it. Like this is the current and active description of it. However, if we scroll down, it'll actually alter the name using AI to generate a new name and then also a new description. So this is our new description for it. So originally it was handles requests like I tried resetting my password and solving issues and so on and so forth. Now it says handles requests related to password problems, including resetting passwords, issues after attempting a reset, difficulties with first-time setup, and so on and so forth, first-time password reset, and so on. Maybe in our case, though, first time password reset or first time password setup, maybe that's not something we want to include in here. Maybe we create a new intent for something like that. Or we just build in the logic of the intent, but we still want to make sure we are evaluating what it changes to so that we can make sure that we are still keeping the quality of these intent descriptions strong. But in this case, I actually really like this description. And then what I can do is just come into here. If I want to make modifications or I really like this, I can make those. And then once I'm done with that, then I can come in here and click on next. And then it'll just kind of give me like a little preview of it just where I can see it again. And then all I have to do from here is just click on finish. And then the changes have been made. If I were to go to that password reset intent, now it's going to be password issues and reset intent. So if I just scroll down to it, here we go. You can now clearly see that that description is now completely different. So that's how we actually go through the resolution of these intents. Are there any questions on that? I'm not seeing any questions. Just kind of want to make sure, let people digest everything we just went over. Give it like another 30 seconds to a minute. Not seeing anything come in, so we will go ahead and jump back to the PowerPoint. Alrighty, so that's everything associated with the training. So just go over some next steps, and then there'll be a quick break, and then time for Q&A. So next steps, so some action items. So we want you just to try out, just kind of mess around with that retraining of your bot. And then also, in addition to that, we want you to create 6 intents. This is a requirement for being handed off to your consultant. So please make sure that you do create those 6 intents with those conversation flows already in there, based off everything that we've learned throughout the week. In addition to that, too, If you once again, so within those action items, 80% of those action items need to be completed, or completion is required before you are can be handed off. So once again, if you ever run into any issues with getting these things or getting those action items done, or you have any questions, don't hesitate to schedule time with that technical services team as needed using that link. Now, for these things, a project issue ID is required, so make sure you log an issue to describe your issue of your question beforehand, and this just helps us to come prepared. We want to know what you're having issues with so we can easily come in and help you direct that in that 30-minute call. And then also, just as a reminder that there are going to be regular reminder emails to let you know for the completion of these things. Now, this questions thing right here is related to the questions for this session. So, are there any questions related to this session? If there are not, then we'll take a 5-minute break and then we will come back and be able to, and then you all can ask questions based off of either the stuff you've learned throughout the week or or uh, any other questions around your bot. So, were there any questions on the stuff that we went over today? So if I wanted to account for various abbreviations for passwords, how would I mod the description? So you could include other, so that's a really good question. So for cases like that, what you could do is now we don't need to necessarily handle for all of them, but just common ones that we would use, like the PW example. That's a that I would refer to as a very niche example of it. Um, but you could just add a little bit of like a small sentence into your intent description, like or like a small like in quotes thing that says like how to get PW reset or something like that. Just provided one of those additional examples. Let me know if that helps to answer your question. And then Sydney asks, where do we find all these action items? So Sydney, those action items are going to be found within your project. Um, for finding those, if you go back to the first day's recording, it talks about where to find those action items. Any other questions? Yeah, that could be an example right there. Now, I will say, like I said, that the PW example was a bit of a staged example of it, but it's can sometimes like you might run into issues where things like that apply. From my personal experience of whenever we swapped over to the agentic intent matching, it actually the AI is able to interpret PW as password. So I tend to find that we don't need to do things like that as often as we used to. The agentic intent matching is still something that's fairly new, so it is one of those things that it actually can usually infer a lot of those types of things and very well. So, any other questions? Not seeing anything come in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and just take a 5-minute break. And then what we'll be able to do is you can come back in and then I can actually, in Zoom, you can raise your hand and I can actually allow you to unmute. And then like I'll still be watching the Q&A and stuff like that, but I'll allow you to unmute so then you can ask questions and have a discussion with me on certain practices. So I have it is 46 minutes past the hour. So we will come back in at 51 minutes past the hour. So feel free to go grab a drink of water. If you have some questions, you can go and ask them in the Q&A still, and then we'll come back in and start answering some of those things and maybe potentially even being able to dive a little bit deeper into some stuff. So we will see you back here in about 5 minutes. Alrighty, so Hope you guys enjoyed that quick little 5-minute break. Now, I did see that we did get one question in the Q&A associated for in general. So, if you look at that, William came in and asked, when we implement a bot, is it for an entire application ticketing system, or can it be hosted or tied to a specific subset or catalog? Our district has a single help desk, but our college campus has different services that aren't available at other campuses. If we made a bot, would it live in the main instance and show up for everybody logging into our TDX environment? So, William, I think I understand your question. If you want to, though, you can raise your hand, and if I start to kind of go off the rails a little bit, oh, well, that was quick. All right. So I set you up. You are allowed to talk.
Yeah, I can answer any questions that you need about clarification on that. Essentially, we want to make sure that if my colleague and I put work into creating and developing a bot, that it's specific to what our campus needs. And if another campus wants to use it or duplicate it or run with it for their needs, they can do their own tuning and tweaking on their own instance of it. And so where would those bots be? Would it be for the entire district because we only have one TDX application? Or would it be specific to a catalog inside of that implementation?
So in that kind of a case, since you guys run out of one Team Dynamics instance, I'm assuming that you guys have multiple client portals. Is that correct?
Yes, we have different kind of help desks. Like we have a facilities help desk, we have a student support help desk, we have an IT help desk. Those are all different applications inside of
Okay.
our environment with
When
different
it,
portals and stuff.
okay, so that's the kind of the key word is the different portals. So yeah, so you would create, so you have the bot application. So like at the very beginning of this, we created a bot application. So you could create different bot applications for those different sub areas with the specific domain information. When you're doing like the knowledge set stuff and things like that, you would just ingest the information that's specifically related to that service area.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Not quite, because again,
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out like if we can set up for like specifically our college or if it's going to live at the district level.
So if you have
Because
a portal that's dedicated to your college, then you can put it on there and then it's just scoped to your information. And we
okay,
can, and as we're ingesting that information, we can like try to limit it down to the scope of just your specific college's information.
for right, so like for example, yesterday we were talking about doing web crawls for websites. So if we looked in our college website, we did a web crawl for that. That puts our college information into it, but our student services number may be different from our sister college's student services number.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so they say, what do I do to get to admissions and records? They say, okay, well, for us, you dial this, but that doesn't necessarily work for other campuses.
Mhm. Yeah, so essentially, like, so if we're doing like from that web crawl perspective, we have like there are methods, and you'll learn more about this during your implementation, but there's like advanced methods for ensuring that you're only crawling set and specific information. There's this like just how you configure it essentially. So it's only pulling that specific information, and then your bot application that is going to be the one that you want for your organization will only contain that information. It won't contain information from anything else.
All right, thank you for your time.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so in other words, you like it just depends on like your process for building it and ingesting that information. Like intents, that's manually done, so that is going to be a manual scoping. But when it comes to the like web crawls and things like that, there are techniques and ways that we can ensure that the scoping is set and specific to your organization when it's pulling that data. So, do you have any other questions while you're on here?
I think that is it for now. We're going to go ahead and start digging into this. I think what we're going to do is probably just stand up a new application, start from scratch so it doesn't have all of the training stuff in here
Mhm.
before
Yeah,
we get handed off to implementation.
mhm. Yeah, and that's what we recommend doing is having that one dedicated bot application that is specific towards your organization, and that's going to be the one you're going to be working out of with your consultant. You're not going to be working out of like one of your training ones. The training ones is more or less just so that you have like your own bot like little sandbox to play with, like play around in, so that you're not potentially messing up like a dedicated university one that you need to make strategic changes out of.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Definitely, yeah. So I'm gonna just put you back into the queue, and then if you have another question, don't hesitate to raise your hand again. Alrighty. Are there any other questions? And once again, you can use the Q&A or you can use the little raise your hand feature in Zoom, and I can unmute you too. Any other questions? General question, what kind of intents do you find many clients ask about? So usually like that's kind of a determining factor for like based on one, like the quality of your knowledge base. So usually what I tend to see is clients like they have like a preset list of dedicated things that the bot needs to be able to answer. We ingest the knowledge set first, and then if that like the things that it's not answering well or consistently, usually we create intents based off of those things. If you're wondering about like common ones that I see, like password reset, MFA, Wi-Fi help, Canvas is one of those ones that I see somewhat often, or some sort of like banner assistance as well. That's another one that I see somewhat often. Um, let's see. Those are really the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head that I like. I would say like I consistently see email issues. Like that's another one. Maybe like some downloading stuff, hardware purchase requests, but usually those are pretty simple of just sending someone to a form. So things like that are pretty like I would say are the pretty common ones out there. So William asked, I noticed that the in the utterance analysis there is a version, there is a column that is titled version. How do we version the bot and what are the best practices for it? So so in your bot, so there's something called bot publishing. So there's like a little publish tab on the left nav. So that is how you like quote unquote version the bot. Now we don't want you to go ahead and do that now. That's something that we want you to do after or like when we're ready to go live. But essentially that's how you create versions of it. The best practices for it, you'll learn a lot about that in your implementation, but the high level of it is once we get our bot like tested and or kind of battle tested and ready, what we'll do is we'll publish it to then so that it essentially creates a copy of what that existing version is. And then as you go in there and make changes, those changes don't happen live until you republish the bot again. Um, but then there's ways that we can do like rollback things of like, so let's say we republish a new version and then we realize that just changes that are happening are not working well. We do have the ability to roll back to the previous version just to ensure that for quick cutovers, and you can easily go in there and make changes for stuff. So you'll learn a lot more about that whenever you actually go through your implementation. That's not really something that we talk too much about in these trainings just because it can sometimes be set and specific to the organization. But good question. It's also going to be a nice, useful way for you to determine what things are like based off of testing versus not testing as well. Any other questions? So what kind of information fields are available to query in a chatbot? Logged in user, access ticket information of the logged in user. So so anything that is so for like querying of information, any type of thing that has an API endpoint, you can query for. So like accessing ticket information for a specific user, that is something that you can do through the Team Dynamics Web API and Web Connections. So that's a feature that is possible. There is a kind of like a pre-built intent out there for it that your consultant will help you get set up. And then our bot does have a really strong identity layer associated with it, which allows you to actually authenticate a user to know who they are, so then you could start doing things on behalf of that user as well. Are there solutions KB articles that would be useful for referencing while we build features into it? So there is a conversational AI section out there right now. A lot of that information is still generalized. We are still working on and diligently working on adding more of like the like more advanced like integration and information querying articles in there at the moment. But right now, a lot of that information is just generalized for getting your bot set up. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. So I created a knowledge set and imported some PDFs I had on hand, hardware quotes. The bot really couldn't answer questions based on those PDFs. Are there guidelines about how to about the what sort of content the system can interpret effectively? I also ingested a simple text doc and that worked fine. So I would be curious to see those PDF documents, like just me personally, to be able to tell you like what it does or like why I think that it's not really handling those too well. Um, let's see though. So normally like text content is going to be the biggest thing that is really well ingestible for that. Now you might look at those hardware quotes and things like that. I'm assuming that it's probably like tables or like and things like that. They sort of look like invoices structurally. So things like that, the bot tends to struggle with because there is sometimes not enough context associated with those things for it to truly have a strong understanding of what that information is there. So one of the examples is like I crawled a contacts page once, and and it had like people's names, their job titles, emails, and some other information about them that it was we didn't fully know. I could go in there and say like who's the chief of human resources, and it would be able to output that. Now, if I came in and I'll just say that person's name was Amy, for example, whenever I came in and said, "What is Amy's phone number?" it wasn't able to answer that because there was no context to knowing that that phone number that was below her on the web page was Amy's phone number specifically. So having the lack of context there is what prevented it from being able to answer questions, which I'm assuming is what's happening with your stuff right there. Is that due to the lack of context within the actual uh, hardware quote of what it was, it's not going to be too strong at answering those things. Now, whenever you're creating a new knowledge set, there is the like the subject matter on the main configuration page of it. Usually putting in something into that subject matter, like saying these are hardware quotes that might receive questions like A, B, and C. Things like that can sometimes really help it to try to find that information better. But as you go through your implementation, you'll work one-on-one with your consultant to really try to uh, find that information and try to answer questions about it. However, what I tend to find is like text-based PDFs, things that are not like tabled data, like how a hardware request probably would be, or some sort of like an invoice usually works best. Those invoices and those table things without any context to what the item is usually tends to struggle a lot. Does that help to answer your question? Okay, I was not aware of that. I'll make sure that we make that. I'll make sure that we write that down. That saying. So just for those who aren't looking at the Q&A, they said that this person said, by the way, yesterday we were told that document Word docs were not supported, but I tried it anyway. The bot was able to interpret it and use the info within the Word doc. So that's just something that I'm going to take down as a note to ensure that we do communicate that that is supported. I'm sorry that that happened. Awesome. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions come in at the moment. Now, this is I'm going to kind of give you all a little impromptu thing for you all. How many, and you can just kind of put it in the chat to say like a yes or no. How many people here would find it valuable to see a presentation that's still a work in progress, slightly outdated, but I'll be able to make adjustments for it. Um, on bot planning. So essentially, how to plan for your chatbots. Then it also not only prepares you for your implementation, but also just bot and like chatbots in the future in general. How many people would find value out of seeing a presentation like that? Okay, well, we got one immediately. Michael, I see that you are raising your hand. I am assuming that I'm just going to take the assumption that you want to ask a question. So I will allow you to talk. Oh, never mind. I saw you unmute your hand. And then I accidentally said someone else to unmute. I do apologize for that. So, all right. So, sorry about that. All right. So, I am seeing a lot of yeses associated with this. So, I will pull up that presentation. Now, like I said, it does not include necessarily with the agentic intent matching features into it. It is based off of our old system of using what's referred to as a COU, where we provide like trained utterances for it. And I will say right now the agentic intent matching is significantly better. I will skip over the parts of the stuff that is out of date, if you will. So bear with me 1 second while I pull that up. You guys are getting more than usually what does happen in this session, so bear with me 1 second. So, and I did just pause my screen. So slideshow from beginning, I'm just kind of flipping through this thing to make sure that everything is in there. All right. And then that I got all my other stuff set up for it. Yep, we do. All right, so let me go from beginning. All right, resume. So this is a presentation I made, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 months ago, and just really hadn't done anything with it yet about about mastering chatbot design. So let's go and just jump right into this. This thing should probably take like 30 to 45 minutes, if that. So, the session outcomes associated with this thing is like how to plan for your bot, what are intents and why are they important, diagramming of intents, some tools to use for the diagramming, elements to include within those things, and then actually how to diagram those intents. So, planning for your bot. So, one of the things you'll learn about implementation and now is what is the importance of planning for your chatbot? Why don't we just immediately start going in there and building? Why do we actually have to take planning into consideration associated with your bot? So, this is why planning is so crucial. Planning is going to help you ensure that there is alignment with your business goals and the needs of your users that are going to be utilizing your chatbot. So, what does this mean? One of the things I often see is that when people are trying to identify intents and create intents, they're not really focused on the main people that are going to be using the bot. So, really coming up with that main audience is going to be crucial initially to identifying what type of intents you want to create. So, and then also taking things into consideration, like one of the really big things is like, let's say your portal is behind authentication. You want to put your bot on your Team Dynamics portal, but your portal is behind authentication. There's probably not too much importance to have for a password reset intent. That's just like an example of why we do this planning, is to think about what are the things that we actually need that are going to be useful to users versus not. If your portal's behind authentication, a password reset intent really isn't going to help anybody because they're already logged in. So, um, in addition to that, with this planning, it's going to set the foundation for a smooth user experience. That's probably the most crucial thing, is that a lot of people really don't like chatbots is because the user experience within them is really not that good. So whenever we do planning, and we'll kind of dive into like how we help to create that smooth user experience, is going to be really crucial for why planning is important. And then the biggest thing that is there is it's going to help us to not have major redesigns throughout the building process or improvement of and it's just going to help us to ease that improvement a lot better. So, and what I tended to see, and this was especially at the beginning when we first started doing these implementations, and even sometimes now, is that the people who just went in there and built stuff and didn't plan accordingly, like for their users and business goals and things like that, we tended to do a lot of like rollback, if you will, of just things that were created that either didn't flow that well, it wasn't a good user experience because people were just going in there and building it, not taking those types of things into consideration. So, what are some of the things that can kind of start helping us to lead to planning? So, one of the biggest things is we want to identify the chatbot's primary role. And just some examples of these things, is this going to be a customer support bot, a lead generation bot? Maybe you do own a deli. I'm a big sandwich fan, so I make any references I can to sandwiches. Um, Maybe a deli bot that's helping use to fulfill orders, things like that. So you want to set and you want to identify that chatbot's primary role. Now, depending on the role of the chatbot, that can actually hugely impact how you want the bot to be built. You also want to make sure that you align goals with some sort of a measurable outcome that you can either create reports on or find some sort of visual data on. One of these things could be reduce call and ticket volume by 20%, maybe have faster resolution times for user inquiries, 24/7 support, things like that. If you can have those types of goals already preset, that's going to help you not only with defining your bot objectives, but also just saying, okay, well, what do we actually want to put into our bot that's going to help actually assist to those measurable outcomes? We also want to ensure that objectives are user focused and actionable. So, like I said earlier, using the example of like if we have a portal that's behind authentication, there's not really much purpose of putting a password reset intent in there. Yes, it's user focused, but for the users that are using that portal because they're logged in, it's not really actionable for anything because they already know their password if they're able to log in. So we want to ensure that those objectives and the things that we're going to create are going to be that part of that user focused and actionable. One of the really big things that we can do is translate these objectives or like the intents that we want to create, those are kind of those objectives, into a user narrative or essentially like a user story. So we want to capture the objective or objectives in a who, what, why format. And then we want to describe that and how the chatbot will deliver on those objectives. This is going to make it easier, especially as you start to build your bot on, and once the bot is live, on answering, have we actually delivered on this objective? So, an example of a case like this, and we want to do this essentially almost on an intent by intent basis. Intents are essentially objectives right here. We want to like I'll just keep using password reset for an example. So our main objective is that users often tend to struggle figuring out how to reset their password on their own, or often call into the help desk for resetting their password, or even though we have self-service password reset, and if they just knew the link, then they could go there and do it on their own. So that's like one of our like issues that we're having. So our objective in this case is to find an easier method to pointing users to the documentation for their passwords and being able to reset and change their passwords and be able to take those self-serviceable actions on their own. So in our case right there, that's going to help us lead to a password reset intent. And we can also probably add a thing in there saying this makes up maybe 70% of our request. And if somebody just knew to go to the chatbot to click on a button that said, "How do I reset my password?" or "password reset," they're immediately going to get the help. They're going to be pointed to the knowledge base article that's probably associated with it, and then in addition to that, to that password self-service reset portal. And then if they're not having issues, then maybe we present the phone number to the help desk, things like that. Doing those types of things associated for your chatbot are going to be absolutely crucial for helping you to identify the things that are going to be absolutely important and valuable to your organization. Are there any questions on setting objectives? Not seeing anything immediately, and just for time's sakes, I'm going to just go ahead and kind of jump through to the next ones. But if you do have a question, like I said, I'm always watching the Q&A and chat for stuff. So this is probably the most crucial thing right here out of any planning intention. You want to define your target audience. And this is just kind of like higher ed examples and even some corporate stuff for, because I know we have mixes of clients. Is your primary focus going to be your students, your faculty and staff? Maybe it's an internal assistance thing because you work for a corporate company and this is just meant for internal support, or you work for state and local government. This is purely just internal support assistance stuff. That will easily help you to define some of those objectives and the intents that you want to create, and potentially even the knowledge that you want to ingest into your bot. We also want to consider the persona of your bot. This is going to be a really crucial thing, especially in the intent design. Like as we're designing intents and the language in it, we want to figure out what's the style language. We want that style language to be consistent. Do you want more of that laid back, formal, or joking? So a lot of times I see like, hello, this is like the IT assistance bot. I'm here to help you with any of your needs. Like, that's a pretty formal tone. I worked with one client and their welcoming message was, "What up? I'm Gigabot." And it was kind of more like that laid back joking style of tone to make users feel a little bit more lighthearted when using it. And it doesn't matter, it just depends on how you want to best fit for that. Having a consistent tone across it will really, and a consistent personality and persona will really help it. Now, and like another example is like I have a client that their mascot is an owl, so it's like they have like some phrases or like little language bits in there. It's like, oh, I'm hooting and hollering for you. Do you have any other questions? Like things like that. And like that I think is really fun, but they keep that very consistent across their bots. So things like that are going to be that like persona aspect. Now, whenever we are considering the persona aspect, we want to ensure that our users know that they are specifically talking to a bot. We need our users to know the difference between when they're talking to a chatbot versus if you want to use live chat, a live end user. Those are going to be very crucial things. Some other things that you can also do that's going to help just with your audience and the understanding of it is coming up with a name for your bot. Once again, it's like, do you want to come up with like a fun name like um oh gosh, I can't think of anything. One of the really good ones that I saw was the bot's name, and kind of like the bot logo was called Talk to the Hawk, because because that organization's mascot was a Seahawk. So their idea was Talk to the Hawk to help like just to kind of get people into there. And I thought that was incredibly creative. You could also just have it being like Ask IT, something like that. The biggest thing I'd recommend is don't use some sort of a human name associated with it to because once again we want people to understand that they're talking to a bot, not a real human. So I definitely wouldn't come in there and name the bot I don't know, like Carl or something like that, or Linda. Maybe you could do like Ask Linda AI support bot or something like that, but make sure that your users know they're talking to a bot. And then also deciding on those logos, so you can actually modify the minimized icon and then the icon and like the banner for it, so that you can have a really good logo for it. For the bot on the solutions portal, that logo was actually brought to us by our marketing department. They were the one that decided on it, as well as the naming schema for it. So don't hesitate to reach out to your marketing departments for those types of things. Are there any questions on understanding your audience? Once again, I'm not going to give too much time for this, just for our time sakes for this, because it is Friday, and I know that 2 hour trainings on a Friday can be a lot. So, I'm not seeing anything come in for like another 10 seconds. All right, so not seeing anything come in, so we will go ahead and move on. So these are some tips and tricks for deciding what goes into your bot. So consider the most commonly asked questions around the subject domain and things and areas that support what our overall goals are. So some of the areas that I tell people to easily go through are like review tickets. So like look at your most common tickets. Usually a good way to start off with that is like look at the items where you have ticket response templates for, because those are going to be like obviously like your quick one-off, like you get the question and it's like, okay, here's a simple response for it. Those are really good topic areas specifically for having intents with answers for them. And then also reviewing the process for how you are answering questions that are currently in place. So looking at that overall process. So if someone comes in with a locked account, what's the process that you, a locked account's not a good example. Maybe like connecting to Wi-Fi, what's that process? Maybe you have some follow-up questions that you want to ask, like, oh, are you trying to connect to the wireless Wi-Fi network and Xbox, things like that. Those are going to be all crucial pieces to assisting in answering or in the intent design. And then also review questions that are common and try to stay away from one-off questions in the very beginning. So you really want to avoid the questions that are just going to be like, and usually I see this within like financial aid questions or certain sub even within IT, like you have like the one user who their laptop caught on fire. So that's going to be like one of those things where maybe we don't need to initially spec something for it, but that could be something later on. Again, we kind of want to look at that. We want to look at that frequency, kind of like how we evaluate unplanned utterances that we talked about earlier. We really want to look at the frequency and the value proposition for this stuff, and then as we hit all those big ones initially, then you can start to go maybe towards those like that smaller impact usages for stuff. Now, this is a little bit out of date, but producing that list of various ways that your users might phrase the question. Like I said, this is prior to the agentic intent matching when we had the CLU involved, where we actually had to provide a various list of ways of how a user might phrase a topic. So we can ignore that. But also, this is kind of the big thing is that we always want to remember that we want that bot to aligned with the objectives that we set. So, example, if we want to reduce ticket and call volume, think about the most common requests that are produced through those channels. And one of the key things is too, and another way that we can also find stuff that's easily added to the bot, look for the things that are self-serviceable for your users that your users still frequently ask questions for. Password reset's a really good example. A lot of organizations use self-service password reset. That's why that's the big example that I always like to use is because that's usually an easy action that users can take on their own if they knew where the documentation was, and that chatbot can actually tell them and point them to those specific places. Are there any questions for tips on deciding what goes into the bot? And also to kind of preface with this as well, this is mostly just dedicated towards intents. This isn't necessarily including with like the knowledge set information. This is like how do we plan for the intents that we want to create within our bot. Give like another like I'll give like a 15 seconds for any questions about deciding what goes into the bot. Not seeing anything come in, so we will go ahead and continue on. So this is some like kind of like review stuff that you guys have probably already done. So I'll kind of jump through this stuff, not like super quickly, but just a little bit fast. So intents, once again, these intents are like that specific goal, that specific purpose or a goal that a user is wanting to achieve when interacting with a chatbot. These are the foundations for chatbot design, enabling that bot to recognize user needs and trigger the appropriate actions or responses. And essentially, the intent is used to more or less categorize different topics that the bot can answer and contains the actual conversation flow. So a lot of times, like, and even for me, I've been building chatbots now for a better part of 7 years. Um, like the phrases of intent and utterance are often confusing. Essentially, an intent is just like a way to say, like, okay, this person's intention is asking about password reset. It's more or less just a label in a category, but our main and to help us categorize things internally to say, like, okay, like this one specific thing right here is handling for people who ask password resets. And that's the primary thing, but it's that conversation flow that actually takes users through that process. Now, some examples of this, like just like a password reset intent would handle a user's request for a step-by-step guide for resetting their password. A billing question intent would handle a user's request with potential follow-up questions that could direct the user down to the proper resources based on their billing question. This is what the list of intents look like in your environment. Like I said, this is a little out of date. This is also prior to the new UI UX release. So, um, but that's just kind of what they look like, just like an example of what some intents might look like in your system. And then this is an example, once again, out of style, but what like an intent design could potentially look like. And this is just once again one of those pure just screenshotted examples. And then this is what like an intent conversation flow could actually look like within the bot. So if we look back at that, we can see somebody asks the question of like, oh, I can't do this one thing in Blackboard. And then we ask an immediate question of saying, well, what do you need help with in Blackboard? Do you need help with access, password reset, technical question, or something else. This is poorly designed intent now that you really think about it, because access and password reset could potentially be kind of the same thing. So, but then this is what it could look like within your actual bot, depending on how you configure your ask step, which you learned about 2 days ago. Now, how intents are triggered. So this is where it gets really out of date. So I just want to set that preface that this is all very incredibly out of date, but I'll tell you what specific parts. So utterances, so basically what the user is asking, the user is typing into their bot. These refer to those various ways that users might phrase their inputs or questions when interacting with a bot. So essentially, it just comes down to how the user asks, or it's the user asking or saying something to the bot. That is an utterance. They're also commonly referred to as training data because, once again, we use those utterances to help retrain our bots over time. Now, I think this next screenshot is going to be the thing that's out of date. So, yeah, this is entirely out of date because we use the intent descriptions now. This is like old school. Like, this is what we used to have to do to try to get bots to actually answer stuff, was we had to provide a list of 20 or 30 examples of saying this is how a user might actually ask that question. And we had to be very strategic about how we built these things. But because of the agentic intent matching that we have now with just the intent descriptions, it's actually entirely different now. So just go ahead and ignore this slide. So before I get into the intent design approaches, are there any questions, confusion, or anything like that around like what intents and utterances are? I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and just keep on checking along through. So whenever we're designing intents, there's a couple of different intent design approaches. And now there's two that I like to really talk about. You have, and I'm sorry if this is a little gray. I didn't even think about that for whenever I'm sharing my screen. But I'll read through these things. So you have two types, and it's like the two columns. You have simple intents and you have broad intents. So looking at simple intents, these are most commonly related to just simple Q&A questions. So like think of like your FAQ list, like a password reset more than likely might be what's referred to as a simple intent. Somebody goes to the bot and says, I can't reset my password. What do I do? Um, we just kind of spit back out an answer associated with them. User asks a question and receives a direct answer for that question. Once again, a user asks how to connect to the internet. Bot just provides an article or responds with with the instructions on how to connect to that network. Now, you could have the other example of that is broad intents. So this is where you find more like the interactive style of interactions or interactive bots. So these encompass related questions around a specific topic. For example, Adobe Help. Generalized intents or these broad intents commonly help to narrow down a user's question to get to a specific answer. So an example of this, if I just had an Adobe intent, just a generalized Adobe intent, there are multiple things that a user could be asking for, such as installation help, getting a license, technical questions, how to log in. You get to build that into your conversation flow to try to narrow down and direct a user to the proper path for what they need. So just some pros and cons associated with this. Now, this pros and cons list are kind of like if you chose one and you only set dedicated to one style. So the simple intents are very easy to define and train since they handle just specific isolated questions. It's easier to update and refine without impacting other intents at times. And then also it's ideal for quick responses. The user doesn't have to go through a lot of interaction associated with those things to get their answers. It's just like you ask a question, answer. Now, some of the cons are if we only went down the route of the simple intents is some scalability issues. One thing that it can create a larger number of intents because once again, it's just like you could have three different account issues or three different password resets or things like that. You're gonna have a lot more intents. Normally, I see customers have anywhere between like 15 to 20 intents, and that's even still a lot. Some people have between 5 and 10 that just handle like the basic stuff, and then the knowledge set portions is what handles the rest of it. Context limitations. So handling those follow-up questions or things that are outside of the scope of that initial intent, that is also going to have some issues with it. In addition, there is some training complexity as well associated with it. Now, this statement is a little out of date. But what we mean by that is like I kind of use that three password, like you have an Adobe password reset, your email password reset, and just your account password reset. Like trying to write intent descriptions or get a user to be specific in what they are specifically wanting is going to be very hard associated with those things, and it's going to create a lot of overlap associated with other intents that are present, and it's just going to make a user not get the direct answer that they need. And then once again, if we're only using the simple intent method, it can lead to user frustration risk because users are asking related but not directly matching questions to get the useful response. So some of the things that you often see is users will provide vague questions for stuff, um, which if we only went simple intents and they're asking vague questions, like you might see a user come in and just say like Adobe help, like, and you have 10 intents around Adobe, it's going to be very hard for it to either find the right one or they're going to be hit with a multi-match that's going to ask, oh, pick one of these 10 that's related to this. So that's going to be one of those things where we run into those types of issues with it. Now, are there any questions on like the pros and cons for the simple intents? Not seeing anything come in. If you do have a question, please type it out and I'll make sure that I answer it. Now, here are the pros and cons to the broad intents. So, like ones that kind of handle those follow-up questions. So, the pros, you get efficient coverage. A single intent can address a wide variety or range of queries under a specific common topic. You get simplified training. Fewer intents means it's fewer intents to manage and reducing the complexity of the intent mapping of stuff as well. You also get better context handling because it's better suited for interactions that require clarification. Kind of jumping back to that Adobe example, or even maybe that banner one at the very beginning, is you get to ask those follow-up questions to truly identify what is this person actually asking for. And then you get that streamlined escalation. You get those points of saying, hey, maybe this one area needs to actually have a ticket created, and we can either prompt the user to go to a specific service or maybe even try to create the ticket right within the bot. Um, I worked with a client where they did a software like or like a um some sort of a software access request intent. It was for like extended learning softwares. I don't remember the exact term for it. Um, but they like rather than creating like one intent per software, they created one intent that encompassed the five softwares and then had like an other option onto it. Some of the intents it was just like, hey, go to this website and sign up with your student email. But then other ones it needed escalation to IT to actually provision that person a license, so we just had it automatically create a ticket on behalf of that user. So that's kind of the advantages to those broad intents is like if somebody just said, I need access to academic software, like we're actually going to come in and ask it rather than that person saying, hey, I need access to Tableau or Minilab, something like that, where they need to be specific. They just get to ask, they can ask it specifically or broad, and no matter what, it'll match that proper intent. Now, here are the things though. You can run into some ambiguity risks. Essentially, there could be higher chances for misclassification due to broader scope of the queries. Now, this is kind of resolved with the agentic intent matching from my personal experience. It's just so much better. Um, and there are kind of some methods that we can do for handling those misclassifications within the intent descriptions to essentially assist with that. There can be some potential additional overhead, which can sometimes lead to some user frustration within it, is because there's steps to clarify the user intent, which can sometimes add friction to the interaction because you're having to ask so many follow-up questions to get to the point where you need it to be. This can also lead to like at those conversation flows, those can actually lead to becoming incredibly complex, um, which whenever you go to or you want to make changes to these things, it can actually end up you could potentially end up breaking something. And I also just realized I skipped over the complex responses. It can lead to less precise answers if you try to cover too many scenarios. Now, what I mean by that is whenever you're creating a broad intent, I always and like you're choosing a category, like account issues could be a category. Things that fall under account issues could be like password reset. You could have maybe something like device, like locked out of device. MFA issues, and then other. We never want to have like more than like 3 to 5 potential options that they choose from. We never want to have more than usually like 5 of those things. Now, if like it's like 7, that's okay, but ideally like our 3 to 5 self-serviceable options, but also including that other path is incredibly useful for us to like just direct them to either like a knowledge base category, maybe just giving them the phone number, or giving them a link to a service request and they can easily go in there and get more clarifying help. Now, the last thing, this user frustration. Now, once again, I had user frustration in the last one and this one, but the user frustration is a little bit different and this is with the context of only going down that broad intent route, is that broader training data can dilute intent performance, affecting that confidence score, potentially leading to incorrect answers. This kind of goes along with the ambiguity risks. However, because of the agentic intent matching, there are some ways in how we can actually improve upon that. You can add things into like the intent descriptions of like when not to use the intent, and like say like, oh, like if somebody like if you had an intent, like an account intent password reset intent, and somebody said, how do I reset my Adobe password? And it keeps matching to that intent. You could have you could add a line saying like, when not to use the intent, and then it's like when somebody asks how to reset their Adobe password, and then maybe point it to a different intent. You get that level of flexibility within it. Um, uh, so like I said, there are ways that we can resolve for those types of things, but there's it can still happen and it can still happen somewhat frequently. But are there any questions associated with broad intents, the pros and cons for those? I'm not seeing anything come in, so we will go ahead and continue on. So now I know you're probably asking yourselves, well, they both have their pros, they both have their cons. Which one do I use? Both approaches obviously have their strengths and their weaknesses. The choice often depends on the complexity of the chatbot and the chatbot's purpose and the diversity of the user queries that we're getting. So if we tend to see that we're getting some vague queries, sometimes a more broader intent option is the best way to go. If we see that people are asking pretty set and specific questions, then we might want to go more of that the simple intent approach. However, and this is my personal experience and experiences that I've seen from other people who've built successful bots, is successful bot designs combine both methods using simple intents for specific FAQs, usually like a password reset, and then broad intents for the more complex topics or more topics that can cover around a specific issue. Like I said, it'll be really also heavily dependent on the information you want to put within the bot. But usually I see a pretty good balance of both for the reasons of just being able to ask those follow-up questions for stuff or just provide that quick and simple information. Now, this is where, for me, whenever I take my customers through implementation, I'm not sure how the other consultants do as much. I know some of them do, some of them don't. I like taking my customers, especially ones that have never built chatbots before, through what I like to call diagramming exercises. Why do we diagram? And this is essentially like flowchart diagrams. This essentially adds visual clarity, and it's also going to lead to an improved collaboration among teams. So whenever you're building on intents, like it's really good to have like people from like your help desk, those subject domains, to say like, hey, this is like what the process is, and then you can visually diagram it out, that conversation flow. That's going to be your biggest benefit right there. It's going to simplify the understanding for a chatbot for your chatbot flow stakeholders, or chatbot flow for stakeholders. So what I mean by that is that it's a lot easier for me to hand a visual diagram to a CIO than it is to say, "Hey, go use the bot and tell me how it is." Um, and mind you, with the diagram, we haven't even built anything into the bot yet. Like that's what this planning is for. We haven't even built it yet. And we're trying to get sign-offs for stuff to say, hey, how does this look? This is what the flow will look like. One of the other things, it's going to help us to identify gaps and overlaps or conflicts within intents early. One of the common things I see for the people who just went in there and built without doing any planning necessarily is they had a lot of either like duplicate intents or intents that were so closely related that, in my opinion, that they could have just been combined into a singular intent. But they had 2 or 3 that were individual ones, And I'm like, hey, we could actually combine these into a singular one for user clarity and just for them to get easier help. And then that leads to that facilitating of the scalability and future modifications. Now, within this, what happens whenever we don't plan for our bot? You usually tend to see those misaligned user journeys, the overlapping or redundant intents. There's usually a lot of increased maintenance and a lot of increased complexity because there was never any documentation. Those diagrams are going to be a huge portion of documentation for your bot. And then this is going to lead, this will, and it's not even a risk, it's honestly will lead to a user frustration and disengagement, which that's not what we want for these chatbots. The planning is the most crucial thing that you can do for your chatbot. Now, whenever we're actually going into diagramming, what are the elements that we need to include within this diagram? Well, this is what I usually say, and some of this stuff is a little bit like iffy, but whenever we're doing the diagram, we're not necessarily focusing on like how the intent is going to be triggered. We just want to focus on the conversation flow of that specific intent. So we look at the goal associated with it, or the goal and their associated user input. So essentially, like, what are they going to be the people asking for this? Triggers, that's essentially that. Connections. So what I mean by that is your links between intents and subintents. So usually I tend to see that be happening more often like in broader intents, where it's like in some cases, like when your follow-up questions might lead to just transferring to an already existing intent. That's why in this, like in the little diagrams at the bottom, there's like a transfer to intent option in there when the intent or intent flow starts and ends. So basically just saying like, oh, this is the start of it. So then we come in immediately asking this top question and then like when it ends and the areas that it ends at. And then this is kind of an optional one is confirmation questions. So usually like whenever users and this is really good for like they or like the broader intents and it's more or less just clarifications of things is like having that user, it's like just saying like, hey, just to confirm you have a question related to XYZ. Makes the user feel understood, but also put it into your perspective of how many times you've used a bot, you ask it a question, and it just immediately went down the wrong hole and you couldn't get out. With that follow-up question or with that confirmation question at the beginning, now you're giving the user option of saying yes or no, that we know that we got to the right thing or we know that we didn't get to the right thing. That's going to be very, very crucial for just keeping your users engaged. Are there any questions associated with this? Not seeing anything come in. So this is where I think the fun begins. So some tools to use for your diagramming. These are three that I found that a lot of people tend to use. Lucid Chart, that's I know like a lot of people have Lucid Chart. Microsoft Visio. Now I know that both of those are paid platforms. There is a free platform out there. It's called app.diagrams.net. This is essentially like a free Visio editor. It is what I recommend my clients to use whenever I take them through these exercises. That platform rocks for stuff. You can save things to Google Drive, you can save things to your device. It is awesome to use, and I absolutely love it. Um, so those are some tools that you can use for this stuff. And we're gonna go over, I know we only have 15 minutes left, um, like how-to diagrams. So I actually have all this stuff pulled up while we were in the break. I pulled all this stuff up with the intention of getting to maybe touch on this. But let me pull up my diagramming stuff. So this is this is app.diagrams.net. I will drop this link into the chat. Here we go. For those who just want to look at this. And then in addition to that too, I have this template with like some example things of like, and these are ones that I've like built with customers as well, like just that kind of show you like what these things might look like. Let me go ahead and drop that file for this thing here also in the chat. I gotta find it though. This PC or no, desktop maybe. Desktop downloads. Here we go. So I also dropped the file in the chat as well. That's associated that like essentially has this template into here. Um, if you want to upload this template, this isn't like a demonstration of how to use this software. It's just more or less a demonstration of like my thought processes for diagramming stuff. But if I go to this file drop down, and then you can do open from, and then whenever you download that file and you want to upload it, you can do open from device, and then just locate that file to pull it up. So whenever we are creating a new intent, so like I'll go through like what I tend to commonly see for a password reset intent. So one thing I can do is I can just create a copy of this thing, and I'll zoom in here. Just can I zoom in on the actual? Okay, it's only gonna. Let me see. I can just make it full screen. There we go. So I'm just gonna make a copy of this diagram. So I can just say duplicate, and then it creates me a copy of the template. And then I'll just call this one like a example of password reset. Usually what I recommend is naming each of those tabs based on the actual intent flow, so then you know which one it is. Uh, so I have that. So one of the things is, so we know that this is going to be a password reset intent. Labeling when that flow starts is really crucial. So usually I just kind of come in here and I click and drag that down. Now, one of the first things that I always, and this is like a pretty common thing that I see for most password reset intents, is the first thing that we're going to do, and I just copied this little ask step down here, is we want to ask the question of saying, like, and this is kind of like the confirmation piece, is saying like, hey, just to confirm, are you asking about a password reset? And then one of the crucial things is we want to diagram the overall flow of this thing. So I'm looking at that flow start. This I know now is that this is going to be the first question that I ask to the user. And then the next thing is, since this is an ask step, I want to have some buttons associated with this. So this little blue box is now my button choices. So I can just do a control C on the yes, and then draw my path associated with it. And I can also do the same thing for the no. Now for the no, we could come in here and do that one. And now just to kind of quickly look at the no branch, I could maybe come in here and say something like, oh, sorry, please try to answer your question in a different way, and then end it. In my case, I'm just going to go directly to that flow end intent. This is going to be like one of those sections where I can end it. And I'm actually going to create a copy of this because I'm going to use it elsewhere too. So now for this yes path. So I'm just going to do a simple say and show step because we know we can confirm that the person is wanting to reset their password. So in this case, I can now say or show some sort of information. In my case, I'm going to say something. I can come in here and say to reset your password. And I don't know how much you guys can actually see that. I can maybe zoom in here a little bit. Yeah, so to reset, make it zoom out. There we go. So to reset your password, please go to a self. And one of the big things too in these diagrams is to include the language that is actually going to go into your bot. The thing I like about these diagrams and why I take people through it is I get people to do the diagrams. We do review sessions of them. And then when it comes time for building out our intents, we copy and paste from these diagrams. We're not having to worry about the content at all. We are just focusing on translating a diagram and putting it into the bot. This diagramming is it's going to be so helpful. You are going to spend more time on the diagrams than you will actually building. But if you don't do the diagrams, you're going to be spending a whole lot of time on the building because then you're going to have to keep going in and refining it. But with these diagrams, including that language, one of the things you can also do is include markdown language as well. So for me, like the password reset, or like for this, I want like certain text of it to be linkable. So I can do this by doing like square brackets. This is going to be my display text of a link, the self-service password reset portal. And then in my case, I would want to include the full URL, which is in parentheses for it. So like https:// self-service portal.com. I'm just making a random URL up there just for sake of time. But so we know that this is going to come off of our yes branch right here. So I can just click and drag that down. And then what's gonna be nice is whenever it comes time to build this, all I have to do is just come in here, click into that, Control C, bring it over to that bot platform, Control V. We already decided on the language. Like I said, bot persona is huge. It's a lot easier to go through and just try to get it right the first time than it is having to reiterate it on it 15 times. So now that we did that, what we want to do, and this is a common thing that I tend to see, is we might ask another follow-up question a little farther down after that that comes in and says like, So after that, we're going to want to ask, like we could say, were you able to get your password reset? And then maybe just make that a little bit bigger. And then we could have like our yes and no options. So I'll just kind of copy and paste these down. So our yes option, then our no option. So our yes, we could say like great or something like that. In my case, just for time's sake, just because I know we only have 8 more minutes left, I'm going to just bring this down to the flow end intent. Now that flow end, what that essentially signifies is the end in the intent end intent. So we're in your bot when you've asked it questions and it comes in and says, is there anything else I can help you with? That's what we're signifying with that flow end. With the no branch though, in our case, maybe I might want to come in here and add another say step that says, for this case, maybe do like, please contact the help desk at, and then like you can also do markdown language for email and telephone numbers as well. So you could do like a support at org.com and then do like your I think it's like mail to, and then the email address, so support at org.com, and then or call at, and then I'll just make something up here. You could also do the telephone one. So like I could do like I'm in 910, so 910 dash 555 dash 5555. And then like I think the URL for this stuff is TEL and then the phone number. And then from there it could go down to that flow end from right there as well. So this is what a simple password reset intent kind of looks like right here. This is what I would refer to as a simple intent. There's not a lot of follow questions. We just ask a confirmation question and then say, hey, like, do you need like to go here to reset your password? That's all it was. It was just a simple quick Q&A. Now, if are there any questions based off of this? Because I am going to show I'm not going to build out an example, but I will show an example of what a more broader intent can look like. Any questions thus far, though? Not seeing any questions, so I'm just going to jump over. This is just a high level example. It's not like a full-fledged example like where it includes the language. It's just kind of like a visual of it, but more of a broad intent. And the template that I dropped into the chat includes all of this, includes this like example, the more broad one. This is like a password reset account issues intent, and this is kind of based off of one that a customer actually had built, and I just came in here and kind of like redid. We have our flow start. Oh, do you need help with your password or other issues? Now, you guys are probably looking at this like, wow, it's confusing, but once again, you all are probably able to follow along with this pretty well. So we know if the person said yes to that account password reset thing, we then ask the question of saying, please pick which best describes your issue. And then we list out those button options for password reset, device lockout, MFA issues, or other. So for a password reset, we go down the process of like, oh, have you enrolled in password reset? Yes or no? And then uh, handle your recording pass for there. The follow up of were you able to get your password reset? Yes or no? No. Contact the help desk. Then we end it. For the device lockout, we just say contact the service desk. We also had an MFA issue in there because some people might not know what MFA is and they just say, I can't get into my account, which would then trigger this. Then they see MFA issue, but then we're labeling saying we're transferring to an MFA intent. So that's like one of those examples where you might see that like in there where you can, this is like the diagram is going to help you map to say like, okay, like somebody might have an issue here, but we already are planning on creating this other intent. So let's just transfer to it because that intent is going to help with issues as well. But we don't want to include it into one massive intent. Maybe we want to just transfer it. And then, like I said, for these types of broader intents, having that other option for specific things is also incredibly useful. So that's why we this is why we diagram so that we can know what is specifically happening within these intents. This is really what goes into the planning phase. Now, I will go in and tell you this right now, and I like setting this expectation. Bot planning is going to be the thing that takes you the longest. You will be building so much faster if you do this type of planning than you expect. You will spend 20 to 30 hours. I'm just making a number up. You will spend 20 hours on the diagramming and planning of your bot. You will spend 2 hours on building all the time you did for the planning, if that. And what I tend to see is whenever I walk customers through building one of these, like when we translate this diagram into an actual intent flow, I see like I do it with a customer once, and then they go through and do the rest of them because normally they'll do like 3 to 5 of them, and then they'll build the rest of them on their own. It really is a nice way just to help with the translation of this stuff. This is something I highly recommend people do. So, and then there's a couple other examples. Some of these examples are just like stuff that I've done with other customers for things. Like this is another password reset one that I did with another customer. This is one that I started to build with a customer. So like there are things in here that are like things that like I was helping with customers. This banner one is like a I think this is one that I did a while back, like kind of doing something like this in a training. This is an example of like one I did with a customer. So you just kind of have those things there present for you. So um, I know there are 2 minutes left. I don't mind staying on a little bit longer. I don't have anything going on immediately following this, but are there any questions on bot planning? And once again, we're still in that Q&A phase, so if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. And if not, then all right. So will you be making your planning deck available for us? I get that some of it's not up to date, but the recommendations and guidelines would be helpful. If you bear with me 1 second, if for anybody who does want it, save a copy. I'll just drop it in the chat here. Um, let's see this PC. I'll just drop it into here. Save. I'll just drop it into the files of this PowerPoint or of this Zoom presentation or Zoom chat, if you will. I just dropped those slides into there. So then if you guys, it's still uploading right now, but if you guys do want it, it's currently being uploaded into the chat. I'll let you know when it's there. And it looks like it's still uploading, but no, that's a really good question. So it looks like it did just get uploaded, so you can download it there as well. Awesome. Any other questions? In general, this was a pretty intense week for what we can do with the bot. We'll require those that we're doing the training to try and digest, reiterate key points, administration, determine what direction we go back on. We'll need feedback and specific moves. I haven't done much with AI before, but this was a neat course to dive into. Thanks for the time. Awesome, William. Thank you for coming in and saying that. This is definitely an intense course, and just fitting everything into these 5 days, it is a lot. But you're going to really go more in depth on these things and the key concepts that are dedicated to your organization for whenever you go into the one-on-one with your consultant. So um, I know that we are at time, so if you do need to hop off, please feel free to go ahead and do that. I appreciate you taking the extra time with me to go over this today. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully I get to have the opportunity of working with your organization here in the near future. So, but like I said, I'll stay on for a couple extra minutes for questions. All right, it doesn't look like any questions are coming up. So once again, I'm going to end the session here in a second, but thank you all for attending today's session. Really excited to see you guys and meet you guys in the future, and I hope you found today incredibly valuable. So, like I said, you guys got special privilege because this isn't normally something that happens during the session. So, thank you all. All right. Thank you guys again. I'm going to go ahead and close out the session. If you guys do have any future questions, please feel free to just go ahead and create project issues, and someone will make sure that they get out to you to help out and assistance with that. I hope you guys, like I said, have a wonderful weekend and look forward to hopefully forward for the opportunity to work with you all in the future. Have a good one. Bye.